only true in fairy tales, and for someone else, but not for me. Our love was out to get me. That's the way it seemed. Disappointment haunted all my dreams.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of the National Conservative Convention, Pamela Hall.
Well, good afternoon, Manchester. I am incredibly excited and delighted to welcome you all to my home, the North West, for this year's conference. We are truly in for a great few days. Like you, I'm a volunteer, and I'd like to start by recognising the hard work, resilience, belief and hope that you show every day, hosting events, knocking on doors and forming latest policy thinking. So thank you. I don't think that is said enough. Thank you for sticking with us in the tough times we've had this year. And don't get me wrong, there is still lots to do. But what a year it has been. And I would like to thank our former Prime Minister, Theresa May, for her dedication to our party, and welcome Boris Johnson to his first conference as our party leader and Prime Minister, who in just 9 weeks, I think we can all agree he's been extremely busy. Now, in terms of our elections this year, I don't want to gloss over or dwell on the results. But in terms of the local elections, with their obvious disappointments, I'd like to thank everyone who worked so hard in fighting over 8,000 council seats. And I'd like to mention some North West highlights. Now, to be a Conservative in the North and in the North West, by God, we have to believe in a cause. So I would now like to mention Councillor David Greenhalgh and all his colleagues. Yeah, they're over there. There's the Bolton crowd. David and all his colleagues on Bolton Council who took control this year for the first time in almost 40 years, and they're making a massive difference there already. Woo! And on Merseyside, we had our first new council seat win for a decade in Pensby. Michael Collins in Wirral West. Oh, the Wirral crowd are in as well. Yay! Won thanks to a massive team effort there led by their parliamentary candidate, Laura Evans. So it just shows what you can do with a will to win, a focus on local messages and a united, hard-working team. Now, over the summer, I was lucky enough to attend around half of the leadership hustings around the country. I was almost word for word by some of those speeches by the end. I think there was something about Mars bars. Anyway, and it was great to see so many members attending, and the exercise was good for us and our party. You'll have seen some of the media commentary about the quality of the questions and the diversity of the audience, with the FT even describing some of the questions as spot on. It helped dispel the typical media narrative about us and our party. And after the great success of the hustings across the country, I know how engaged you will all be alongside the CPF as we introduce debates back into the main hall. There'll be opportunities in here to ask questions of Cabinet Ministers and panel guests, and I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your contributions. The party that I know and I see every week as I travel around the country campaigning and speaking at events is made up of engaged and engaging men and women of every ethnicity, faith, age and sexual orientation, united by their belief in our country, our institutions and an unshakable tradition of public service, an admirable commitment to campaigning in all weathers. Now this year we are celebrating 100 years of the Conservative Women's Organisation, and I'd like to welcome the new chairman, Fleur Butler, who I'm sure you'll see over the next few days. Now, 100 years on, the CWO do amazing work to support and encourage women and men get into public life, with training courses, mentoring, sharing ideas and good practice, as well as support and fundraising that they do for all our campaigns. Now, as the President of the National Convention, and talk to me later if you want to know more about what that is, I'm the only woman volunteer elected onto the party board. And we had some great women this year apply to be Vice President. But we know, socialists preach equality, we deliver. 2 Conservative Prime Ministers, the leader of the House of Lords, 2 former leaders of the Scottish Conservatives, many council leaders and group leaders. So in our party, good women get on. We just need more of us. So we have to do better at communicating our diverse beliefs and progressive achievements. And it's also worth reflecting that Emmeline Pankhurst stood as a Conservative candidate, but sadly died before she was elected. If she'd been in the Labour Party, we'd never hear the end of it. So do look out for some of the fantastic CWO events over the next few days. Now, I've never met anyone in our party who cares where you come from. We just care about where you want to go. And we must not forget there is far more that unites us than divides us. And we all know Brexit must be delivered by the end of October. And we have a Prime Minister. See lots of Brexit done signs flying in the corners. So we know it must be delivered by the end of October, and we have a Prime Minister who is determined to do just that. Because it's only by finally getting Brexit done that we can move on to the other issues that people care about, including investing in our NHS, our infrastructure, police and schools. So at this year's conference, you'll be hearing about the government's plan to get Brexit done and get Britain back on the road to a brighter future. We have an exciting few days ahead. Now, the first election I had a vote in was 1992, so I'm showing my age here. But I campaigned in my home seat, City of Chester, for Giles Brandreth. But that's when I caught the bug and I attended my first conference in Blackpool that year. And that's why I'm delighted this year to be chairing conference in the North West, showing what the North West and our party have to offer. So over the next few days, we'll be highlighting fantastic local businesses, people, charities and organisations which do amazing things in our communities. And I'd like to extend a particular welcome to all those attending conference for the first time this year. Have a really great time. Now, there's some special sessions in the main hall in the exhibition centre, which will focus on things like the Northern Powerhouse. And I assure you, it's not just a train line. But there's some incredible organisations changing our communities that will be in here. Outside in the exhibition, there's an environment zone, where as well as fun and games, there are examples of how each of us can make a difference to sustain change. And of course, we will be setting our vision for a successful and vibrant post-Brexit Britain. The main hall will be a buzz where you'll have a chance to contribute and help shape our party's future, so do please come along in here. Alongside the hundreds of fringe events, which we all love, there are many training sessions, and you'll hear about the latest campaigning ideas and share successes with colleagues around the country. So I would like to finish by thanking the Manchester City Council and the Midland Hotel for providing such fantastic venues and support for us. The conference would also not be possible without the help and support of G4S and the Greater Manchester Police. Thank you. As you can imagine, it's been a fluid few weeks as we've been preparing the conference agenda. So I'd like to also thank those who've helped organise the conference, David Comerford and Kate Jenkins, and our convention chairman, Andrew Sharp, for all his support. My final thanks are to you, our members, who make sure our party is ready for the future and the rest of the change this year will bring. I wish you all an enjoyable conference. This is going to be one of the most exciting in years, and I look forward to seeing you all over the next few days. Have a great time, everyone, and let's get Brexit done.
This is the oldest and most successful political movement in the history of mankind. Let's not underestimate what a fantastic, fantastic organisation we are part of.
This government will take this country out of the European Union on October the 31st. I know he's worried about free trade deals with America, but there's only one chlorinated chicken that I can see in this house, and he's on that bench.
Hey, Joe. Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Pamela. It is an absolute privilege to welcome you to the 136th Conservative Party Conference and to welcome you as party chairman. When I gave my first political speech at the 2002 party conference, I never imagined that one day I would be here in this position. Now, I've got a bit more used to public speaking since then, a little too used to public speaking, some people might say. But there's no getting used to this. So thank you so very much for being here, and thank you so very much for so much more besides. For your tireless campaigning, your enduring support. Thank you to our candidates, councillors, assembly members, MPs, MSPs, mayors and PCCs. To our young Conservatives, to our old Conservatives, to my Deputy Chairman Paul and my fantastic team of Vice Chairmen, and to Andrew Sharp, Chairman of the National Convention, and to my co-chairman, Ben Elliott, who is making sure that CCHQ is a fighting fit, election-winning machine. And thank you to my good friend and predecessor, Brandon Lewis, who did so much of the groundwork to make sure that this conference happened. But most of all, I want to thank you, our members. This is your party, this is your conference. I know there were questions about us even being here. Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP, they just love to block things. They tried to block our conference. They failed. They're trying to block Brexit. They will fail. This year's conference, we're going to do things a little bit different. You'll have more chances to ask questions, put forward ideas, quiz those of us in elected positions using the app, which I hope you have all downloaded. Yeah? Well, if you haven't, make sure you do. Because this is your conference, and we are going to put you centre stage. And there are more of you here today than at any point in the last 20 years. I'm proud to be a member of the most diverse cabinet in our country's history. And the team that the Prime Minister has built reflects the commitment to opportunity at the heart of our party's political identity. This is a government that believes that everybody should have the chance to live the very best life they can, whatever that looks like to them. And this means balancing security with opportunity, helping those that stumble without hindering those that fly. As Conservatives, we appreciate that challenge and we are ready to meet it. The same cannot be said of Corbyn's Labour Party. Choice, freedom and diversity are anathema to Corbyn and his comrades, because Corbyn's worldview allows no room for diversity of thought. The modern Labour Party is happy for you to look different as long as you think the same. You may have noticed You may have noticed that I am not exactly shy when it comes to having a go at the Labour Party. But there's a good reason for this. It wasn't the Labour Party that unlocked my potential. It was my family, my school, the businesses I worked for, the British Army, and this party, the Conservative Party. Having been a member of the Reserve Forces for many years, I am proud that we have veterans, reservists, and cadet volunteers in every level of our party. The contribution of our brothers and sisters in arms cannot be overstated. So, today, conference, I can announce that we have formally recognised the contribution of the Forces family. Yesterday, the Prime Minister and I signed the Armed Forces Covenant on behalf of the Conservative Party, the first and only political party in the UK to have done so. We are setting out our enduring respect for veterans, reservists, and forces families. We say to the armed forces, the Conservative Party is on your side. Meanwhile, Labour attack the very fundamental values that underpin our society. Values that not too long ago were shared by all major parties. This is not the Labour Party of Clement Attlee or Jim Callaghan. Neil Kinnock, who led the Labour Party's fight against left-wing extremism in the 1980s, described Corbyn's election as the greatest crisis that the Labour Party has ever faced. Labour was once a patriotic party that sought to genuinely represent the interests of its voters. But Corbyn's Labour is a different proposition entirely. Led by a man who seems to seek out opportunities to support those who would do us harm. A man who sees NATO as a danger and instinctively sides with Russia over our long-term allies and friends, who wants to ignore the largest vote in our nation's history and refuses to let voters judge his actions at the ballot box. Corbyn has called for an election at least 35 times since 2017. But when it came to the opportunity, he ducked it twice. Now, instead of making the case, Labour prefer to manipulate the parliamentary process whilst hiding from the very people they claim to represent. Frankly, it's just not good enough. But whilst Labour continues to fudge their position, we have a clear message. Let's get Brexit done and get on with making the UK, and I mean the whole of the UK, a better, safer, fairer and more prosperous place for everyone to live. We will leave the EU on October the 31st. No ifs, no buts. After 3 long years, we recognise the damage that more pointless delay would cause, and we appreciate the need to act on the decision of the British people. When we said your decision would be final, we meant it. The opposition parties clearly did not. And this is not just about honouring the decision of 17.4 million people who voted leave. It's about respecting democracy. Because while Nicola Sturgeon and Joe Swinson might think otherwise, you can't just ignore referendum results you don't like. And with Brexit delivered, we will focus on the domestic issues we know deserve our full attention. I am proud of our record in government, but there is still more to do. As the Chancellor said a few weeks ago, after a decade of recovery, we will deliver a decade of renewal. And that recovery has not been easy. Our progress is a testament to the hard work of the British people. When we took office in 2010, the country was nearly bankrupt. As the outgoing Chief Secretary to the Treasury so helpfully summarised at the time, there's no money left. such casual disdain for our public finances. That's the Labour way. Thankfully, now, our national debt is falling sustainably for the first time in a generation. Wages are rising faster than prices, and the deficit is down to 1.1% of GDP. And the fundamental strength of our economy will allow us to deliver on people's priorities. Because you know, as well as me, that when you speak to people on the doorstep, it's not Brexit that they want to talk about. It's schools, it's policing, it's our NHS. Those are their priorities, and they must be ours. Since becoming party chairman just 2 months ago, I've been to every region of England and every nation in the United Kingdom. And whether north, south, east, west, Scotland, England, Wales, or Northern Ireland, the instruction I am given is always the same. Get Brexit done. Seize the opportunity that it offers us. Get on with delivering for families and communities like ours. Conservatives in government have been doing just that for centuries. It was a Conservative Home Secretary who established the Metropolitan Police, protecting the poor and powerless from criminals. A Conservative Education Minister who brought in free secondary education for every child, irrespective of wealth. And it was a Conservative Health Minister who set the foundations for our National Health Service. But we don't rest on our historic record, we build upon it. Delivering 20,000 more police officers, boosting school funding by £14 billion and ensuring the record investment in the NHS reaches the front line. Finally, conference. The election that Corbyn has tried to avoid will come. And when it does, we will be ready and we will win. We have a team of first-class candidates in place. We have campaign managers spread far and wide. And, most importantly, Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, elected by you, our members, has given us a clear, compelling, positive message to take to the country. So I say to Jeremy Corbyn, bring it on. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panel chair, Sophia Gaston.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sophia Gaston. I'm the director of the British Foreign Policy Group. It's a great privilege and honor to be here today to chair this panel. It's plain for all to see that Britain stands at a crossroads, a really crucial point in our history. Brexit has compelled a conversation about our role in the world. It's also true that this conference comes at a time when the nature of global challenges is evolving rapidly. Many of these, such as climate change, migration, security, transcend national borders and require us to forge strong and productive relationships. There are also, of course, many opportunities that await Britain in this new landscape, but we must be smart and strategic and agile in order to seize them. On this panel here today, we bring together 3 of the Secretaries of State who really stand on the front line of our efforts to achieve this. This is an interactive panel, and there is a way in which you can be contributing to the live conversation through the conference app. We are crossing our fingers that we do not have any technical difficulties, but please send your questions in by logging onto the session. You can upvote questions, and we'll try and address as many of them as we can throughout the session. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Ben Wallace, the Secretary of State for Defense.
Good afternoon, conference, and can I just say, as a Lancashire MP, it's really nice to be here in Manchester, at the heart of the Northwest. I don't apologise for the rain. It's managed to defeat the protesters, I noticed. I think some of them don't really like a shower from time to time, so I suspect that's what's driven them away. The amazing thing about this region is its contribution to wealth, science and innovation to the rest of the nation, and its reputation is unrivaled. It's a region that builds our ships, our submarines and our aircraft that we use to keep our nation safe. In fact, Northwest aerospace industries have a combined turnover of £7 billion and export all over the world. You know, it wasn't for nothing that Mr. Rolls met Mr. Royce in the Midland Hotel 115 years ago, and the rest, you could say, is history. The pursuit of excellence is what our defence companies do, which is why we rely on them to supply our armed forces. Excellent defence anchored in engineering excellence, a partnership that supports jobs and skills up and down the spine of the United Kingdom, spreading prosperity and creating wealth and paying taxes. I was delighted in July to have been appointed Secretary of State for Defence. It is a great privilege to be in charge of a department that has within it so many amazing men and women whose can-do attitude and dedication to duty ensures we can sleep soundly at night as a nation. As a former soldier, it felt like coming home. Now, I have to admit that when I served, I was not the highest of flyers. I was not always in the good books. Indeed, I was often in receipt of numerous extra guard duties for one transgression or another. But I wouldn't have missed my years in uniform for the world. The camaraderie, the sense of purpose, and the experiences equipped me for life. And yes, we faced danger and saw things no one else should have to see, but we did it together. And we did it because deep down, we believed in the values of this great country. Those values haven't changed. Our belief in freedom, the rule of law, tolerance and democracy. Our armed forces are the vanguard of those values. They are the most important equipment of all, and it is our duty as politicians to honour them with honesty and clear leadership. For too many decades, politicians have had greater ambitions than they were prepared to fund. Funding pressures were dealt with not by doing less, but by hollowing out and leaving our forces overstretched or overspent, or both. In September, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor recognised the importance of defence by putting their money where their mouth was. The record £2.2 billion settlement now means we can properly deliver both the investment into our people and into our future capability. With the new funding, we will invest in better accommodation, better childcare for the workforce, and career pathways for our armed forces. And we can ensure that we don't overstretch and run down our equipment. And that is why, as the new shipbuilding czar, I was able to confirm the order of 5 new British-made Type 31 frigates earlier this month. Much of what defence does is often unseen, over the horizon or deep under the oceans. But that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It does. In the 21st century, securing the nation is no easy task. The threats ranged against us come from far and wide, from terrorists, from states, and from natural phenomena. Our security is threatened in different dimensions, land, sea, space, cyber, day and night, and winter and summer. Our adversaries constantly look for new means and attack vectors. In the 21 years since I have left the army, warfighting has changed beyond all recognition. Drones, the internet, satellites, artificial intelligence all pose new challenges. Much of what we do overseas, such as fighting against ISIL, is designed to keep our streets safe here at home. And as Defence Secretary, I'm determined to meet these 21st century challenges by delivering reform. It's vital that the UK delivers an up-to-date defence capability that allows us to not only defend ourselves, but to also ensure we play a leading role in shaping the globe, supporting our allies and protecting the rules-based system. Last week, on the eastern reaches of Ukraine, I observed Russian separatist trenches at first hand. But our friends in Ukraine aren't alone. Our army is there too, training and advising, making sure Russian efforts to undermine the international rule of law that we all live by are not successful. And at home, our troops are ready and able to help mitigate the consequences of terrorism or floods that we saw this year. In fact, our armed forces always stand ready to contribute to that most vital duty of government, defence. The Ministry of Defence I lead is lucky to have an excellent team of ministers. Mark Lancaster, Baroness Goldie, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, Johnny Mercer and Leo Doherty. That means there are 4 ministers who have served in the armed forces working in the department. Unprecedented, I am sure. But let's contrast our team with Labour's. A leader and shadow chancellor who spent more time honouring dead terrorists than they have British veterans. A leader who, when me and my soldiers were fighting the IRA, he was sipping tea with them. And a Labour Party who would shut down our defence industries out of a misguided ideological crusade, as ever, playing politics with people's livelihoods. After Brexit, Britain will want to spread her wings to new markets and new territories. We will want to strengthen our international links. For example, the Five Eyes nations, the US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand and ourselves already trust and share the same values. In defence, we must embrace them even more, helping each other from the Arctic to the Pacific. But most of all, defence must be global Britain's tip of the spear, the spine of our great nation. It must be modern and potent, ready and able. And as Defence Secretary, I'm determined to deliver just that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. We have an opportunity now to go to some of the questions that have come through on the app. I hope you're all participating actively. The first question really, I think, picks up on something that you spoke to in your comments there, but there's clearly a huge degree of interest in this about what the Conservative Party is specifically doing to help support veterans.
Well, first of all, we set up, Johnny Mercer and the Prime Minister, the Office of Veterans, a first, with a cross-government determination, with a representative in the Cabinet, Oliver Dowden, to make sure that our veterans' needs, which are often varied and not just focused in the Ministry of Defence, are delivered by all the departments of government and also the wider society. That's always been a challenge, getting government to do everything coordinated. It always is. But with this new unit, and Johnny Mercer, a veteran himself, and an enthusiastic and a great supporter of veterans' causes, will be able to drive home those initiatives. Today we saw the Conservative Party sign up to the Armed Forces Covenant. And we've got to make sure, therefore, that we deliver it into every local authority, into the employers outside in the world, so that our veterans, when they leave, get better support, and make sure that their contribution to keeping us safe is recognised long after they have stopped serving the colours.
Thank you. And another question that's come through that I think actually speaks across portfolios here of all of our panel members is really around our relationship to the Commonwealth. So how can we use Brexit as an opportunity to reinvigorate and re-energise that relationship? Liz, maybe you want to start.
Well, I've just done visits to Australia and New Zealand, and what really struck me is how many times people use the word family to describe their relationship with the UK. And the fact is that when we entered the EU, we did begin to lose the depth of relationship we'd had with countries like Australia and New Zealand, but also Canada and the wider Commonwealth. And I think we've got a huge opportunity as we leave the European Union to deepen our links in all kinds of ways, because we do share values, we do share experiences. And certainly in terms of trade, I'm going to be hosting a meeting on the 10th of October with Commonwealth trade ministers talking about how are we going to deepen those trading links, because having a more flexible free trade agreement with the EU gives us new flexibility to be able to do different with all of our friends and family across the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Liz. And I think we've got time for one more question. Another question that's sort of screaming up the charts here is on climate change. And Alok, I think this is a perfect segue into your speech. Climate change obviously has a sort of disproportionate risk it is posing to some of the poorest countries in the world. What more can we do through our aid portfolio to really take a leading role in that?
Well, I think as a country, we are right at the forefront of helping poorer nations deal with climate change. I was at the UN General Assembly with the Prime Minister, Zach Goldsmith, some of our other colleagues, and you felt that actually just about everyone thought that the UK was absolutely leading the way when it comes to tackling climate change. We announced, the Prime Minister announced that we would be doubling our commitment to dealing with climate change. And I think it's so important to realize that at the end of the day, if we do not get to grips with climate change and we don't have what I would call climate resilient infrastructure in place, we are going to face a big problem. And so when we help other countries to deal with this issue, we are also ultimately helping ourselves.
Brilliant, thank you. And that's a wonderful opportunity to segue into your speech. I have the honor of presenting Alok Sharma, the Minister of State, Secretary of State, sorry, for International Development.
For a minute there, I thought I'd been demoted. Conference. 5 weeks ago, I stood at one of the busiest crossings along the border of Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I saw the vital support that UK aid is providing to prevent Ebola crossing borders. I spoke to health visitors, community leaders, women and children in a local school, and their verdict was unanimous. Britain's international leadership in combating the spread of this deadly disease has been critical in saving lives. Now, of course, some may ask, why does this matter for Britain? And to them, I would say, because it is the right thing to do. Since August 2018, over 2,000 people have died in East Africa because of Ebola. The last reported case, a 9-year-old Congolese girl. And what I would say is that if we can prevent deaths from diseases where there are cures and vaccines, we must act. But for me, the Conservative Party's ultimate goal is about supporting countries to help themselves, to become economically self-sustaining, our trading partners of the future. I want developing countries to trade their way out of needing aid. It is a vision shared by my brilliant ministerial colleagues, Zach Goldsmith, Andrew Morrison, Andy Stevenson, and Liz Sugg. Now, conference, successful countries draw on the talent of all their populations. And that is why I'm absolutely delighted that our Prime Minister is championing 12 years of quality education for every girl around the world. On a visit to Kaduna State in Nigeria, I saw precisely what British leadership and support can achieve. I visited a previously failing school, which, with UK support, had doubled its school roll in 2 years. Over half the pupils enrolled are girls, and they're achieving great results. And the students spoke of their ambitions to be business leaders, journalists, doctors. Conference, we should be very proud that it is a Conservative Prime Minister and a Conservative government helping to empower girls and women around the world. But Conference, we know that Conservative Prime Ministers have a habit of setting the pace on global action. I remember the last time I spoke on the main conference stage. I was 20, so just a few years ago. But we were in Blackpool, some of you will remember this, we were in Blackpool and Margaret Thatcher was our Prime Minister. Now for all of us, Lady Thatcher is an icon, and that is certainly how my family has always regarded her. It was her economic policies that allowed my parents to build their small business. And on a personal level, my family owes her a deep sense of heartfelt gratitude. But of course, Margaret Thatcher set the pace in so many areas, including on climate change. She did more than any other major UK politician at the time to legitimise the environment as a concern at the highest level. 30 years ago, she spoke passionately at the United Nations about the threat posed by climate change. And this week at the United Nations, our Prime Minister announced that we will double our support to help developing countries turn the tide against climate change and species loss. Conference, it is us Conservatives tackling climate change and protecting the world's biodiversity. Since arriving at DFID, I have renewed our emphasis on economic development, particularly when it comes to climate-resilient infrastructure. I've set up an infrastructure commission to help us mobilize private sector investment to create jobs which will lift millions out of poverty in Africa. We must support partner countries to raise more resources through private sector investment and their own tax revenues. So, within 10 years, we want to support partner countries to raise 10 times more resource through private sector investment and their own tax revenues than they receive in UK aid. That is how we build sustainable economies. And that is where we differ so much from Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. Labour believe in handouts at home and abroad. We believe in a helping hand. Labour see business as the enemy. We see the private sector as an enabler. And leaving the European Union will present new opportunities. We will be able to spend our aid budget more efficiently, deciding for ourselves what to spend it on. And that's why we need to get Brexit done. Now, Conference, we know that the only reason our country is able to help others is because of our strong economy. A strong economy rescued once again by a Conservative government from the clutches of another failing Labour administration. This is an economy based on sound economic principles, delivering record employment, wages growth outpacing inflation. What is Jeremy Corbyn's economic model? Venezuela. And who is Jeremy Corbyn's, one of his friends? Maduro, the Marxist ruler of Venezuela. A man whose policies have resulted in millions of Venezuelans fleeing their country and millions more trapped, suffering the impact of a growing humanitarian crisis. Their economy collapsed, their public services collapsed, the very being of the country on life support. We should be very proud that Britain has stepped forward to provide life-saving humanitarian support to millions of Venezuelans. Just last week, I announced an aid package that will deliver life-saving medicine and clean water to those suffering from the dire crisis in that country. Conference, Venezuela should serve as a grim reminder to all of us why we cannot allow Corbyn and his Marxist henchman McDonnell loose on the British economy. We need a thriving economy in order to be able to help others. And as Conservatives, I believe, there is a moral and economic case for UK aid. What I will not tolerate is hard-working taxpayers' money, your money, being frittered away on projects that don't make a difference to the world's poorest. UK aid must be built on a commitment to end extreme poverty. Conference, we should be so proud to live in the best country in the world, a tolerant, generous, outward-looking nation, with one of the world's biggest economies, providing leadership on the international stage, projecting British values around the globe. But to do all that, we must keep our economy strong with a Conservative government, united behind our one nation Prime Minister, ready to get Brexit done so we can move on and deliver on the people's priorities, delivering opportunity and economic prosperity across the whole of our great United Kingdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Alok. You mentioned in your remarks about Africa in particular, and this actually chimes with the question that I'd like to put to the whole panel, which is really around how we can leverage Brexit to actually strengthen and improve our relationship with the whole of Africa. Liz, would you like to start? Or?
Well, I think we've got a huge opportunity, as Alok talks about, to trade more with many developing and developed countries in Africa and beyond. And as I've said, we're hosting a meeting of the Commonwealth Trade Ministers. I think that will be a big opportunity to move that forward. But also, leaving the customs union, we're able to set our own tariffs, so we will be able to help developing nations, rather than by receiving aid to be better off, lower the tariffs so they can export more of their goods and make money through free enterprise, which is the way we know that countries ultimately succeed.
I think post-Brexit will remind us so much the importance of security in enabling a trade. You know, there is growing extremism in large parts of Africa, and that can be fixed in two ways. One is dealing with poverty and the root causes of extremism, but also what we're doing in the United Kingdom Armed Forces, which is helping countries provide the stability and security that is so important to allowing trade to take place. So we are in Kenya. We're helping the French and the UN in Mali make sure we deal with those issues. That's really important because Africa is not immune to what we've seen in the Middle East with ISIL. In fact, they are spreading across into Africa. And so when people say, you know, there's always the question about, you know, what's defense for? We don't see where our money goes. Well, where it is, just like we did in the 19th century about keeping our trade routes open, we are out there in those future markets, making sure that when UK citizens go out there to do business, that there's less corruption, there's more security, and everyone can be safe in that environment. And that's a hand-in-hand partnership for all three of us on this panel to make sure we deliver post-Brexit.
Alec.
So I think one of the things that perhaps a lot of people don't realize is that in the Department of International Development, we also work with Liz's department on developing trade policy with developing countries. I think that's part of the work that we do. And I have to say to you, one of the things that struck me when I have made visits overseas is not only the high regard in which our country is held, but also because when we provide support to people, and you hear this from prime ministers and presidents when you go around, when we provide support, they see that as providing support so that they can help themselves. We don't just arrive and leave. We are there, we spend time, we help them develop their economies. And as I said, at the end of the day, I'm very proud to say that the work that we are doing is also helping to develop our trading partners of the future. And that's where you see the work that we do together. This is one joined-up government, not individual departments.
Thank you, Alec. I think that actually speaks to some of the other questions that are coming through, which are sort of around cooperation and the overlap and the opportunities for collaboration between different departments. And I think actually it would be very interesting, Ben, to hear your thoughts on about the role that the military and our defence forces can play in humanitarian aid and what we're doing around the world.
Well, the government has an excellent fund called the Conflict, Stability and Security Fund, the CSSF Fund. And while it is sort of born out of the defence aid budget, aid budget, it is shared and shaped across government. So the United Kingdom's forces in Mali, which is about protecting both Mali and West Africa from radicalisation and Boko Haram and some other ISIL terrorist groups, it's also about making sure we deal with the causes of migration. People come through Mali, into Algeria, into Libya, across the coast, across the Mediterranean, into Europe. It's also about dealing with reinforcing a country to be stable and its neighbours, such as obviously Ghana and other countries like that. And that is funded by CSSF. It's not funded by the defence budget at one level. It's funded by the aid budget, because that is how we are going to make sure that problems, A, don't come home here, but also allows those countries to be a success so that we can trade. And we constantly have the discussions about CSSF, where we can spend it. In my last job as security minister, it would be around making sure that where British tourists go on holiday often, how do we help some of those emerging economies with their security so that when our families are abroad on holiday, they are safe and secure. And it's been a really, really good fund. It's been the best fund, in my view, and I would say that as Defence Secretary, in government at delivering some really good capabilities across the world.
No, I was going to say, I absolutely agree with Ben. I was out in Nigeria recently, and I went to see some of our troops, British troops, helping to train Nigerian forces who are having to deal with Boko Haram in the north of that country. And this work is absolutely vital, because it's so important to remember that whilst this work is going on in these countries, this is ultimately also about keeping us safe and maintaining security in our country. And that's why I'm very happy when we work cross government to try and deliver this sort of support in countries that need it.
We're obviously living in a time when even intrastate conflicts are growing, and there's a lot of people on the move, there's a lot of people fleeing quite desperate situations. What role is Britain playing in managing the humanitarian side of this? What role are we playing in helping refugees? And what's a story that perhaps the British people might not be aware of, where we have a fingerprint, outside of Britain?
Yeah, perhaps I can take that. So, we lead the world when it comes to giving humanitarian support, and absolutely that is the right thing to do. So whether it is in Syria, in Idlib, or whether it is in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh dealing with the Rohingya crisis, there is a lot that we provide. I just talked in my speech about Venezuela, and this is about providing basic support to millions of women, children, men, of course, and it's about getting the basic stuff to them, foodstuffs. It's about making sure they are immunized. And actually, if you look in a place like Syria, we're also providing support so that young people there can get education. Things shouldn't just stop because people are living in a crisis zone. They need to continue to get that support, and that's something I'm certainly very, very proud of.
Brilliant. And we've had another question coming through around still in the space of developing countries. Liz, you might want to come in on this. It's around encouraging private investment in developing countries and thinking about the full scope of the globe in terms of helping British businesses to export.
I think one of the massive opportunities of Brexit is for Britain to be once again at the table in the WTO, making the case for free trade, making the case for enterprise, and fighting some of the bad ideas that have done so much to ruin countries like Venezuela. So by being out there, by making the case that actually it's trade and enterprise that have lifted 1 billion people out of poverty, that is what we should be talking about, and that helps influence the international debate, because there's no doubt that there is a strong voice for protectionism, that we see many countries trying to hide behind trade barriers, trying to claim that by simply restricting jobs to their own country, they're helping the world. But we know that that is a plague on everyone's house, is that ultimately leads to less opportunity, less jobs, and fewer but lower standards of living in the long term. So Britain, as a country that has always been, or certainly since Peel, in favour of free trade, our voice is needed. And one of the things that really struck me when I travelled around the world is people were saying, we want to see you out there. We need to see Britain arguing, you're the 5th largest economy in the world, we want to hear your voice. And that has huge influence and resonance, and I think it's a really exciting opportunity for us as we leave the EU.
If we're about to embark on a conversation about free trade and trade deals and so on, that we haven't really had a kind of public conversation about this for some time, there are a lot of social concerns as well that underpin people's anxieties around trade and which have been fueling this sort of protectionist, sort of the rise of protectionism, the backlash against globalization. What can you do to help make the case that free trade is not something that people should see as a threat?
Well, one of the things I have been doing is showing the huge benefit to British industry and British jobs of trade. So I've just been out in Australia. One of the things I was promoting was the Brompton bike in Sydney Harbour. Now that is our largest bike producer now in Britain. And every single bike we sell in Australia or America are more jobs here in the UK. Likewise, Welsh lamb is currently not allowed in the US. The US is the 2nd largest importer of lamb in the world. If we can get lamb into the US market, that is a huge opportunity for our lamb farmers. So we shouldn't be afraid as Britain. We have great products that people want to buy. We lead the world in financial services. We lead the world in areas like insurance. It's in our interests for other countries to open up their markets to us. And that is what we need to think about when we're talking about free trade.
Do you want to come in?
Yes, so I just wanted to actually link from the last question to this one. So there's about $140 billion worth of aid which goes from richer countries around the world to developing countries. But the UN has estimated that if we are going to deliver on their sustainable development goals by 2030, it needs an extra £2.5 trillion a year going into infrastructure and other support for developing countries. Now, that is not going to come from governments. That has to come from the private sector. And that's why I've been very keen to set up this infrastructure commission where, taking advantage, as Liz says, of the fact that, we are world leading when it comes to financial services. So we've got the stock exchange working with us and other experts who have a knowledge of infrastructure in Asia and Africa coming together to make recommendations on how, alongside government aid money, we're actually getting a lot more private sector money in as well, into development, into infrastructure. And if we build up these countries, they are absolutely our future trading partners. And that's where there is this link in the work that we do.
Thank you, Alec. I think we've got time for one more question, and I'll just direct this to Ben. We've got quite a few people asking around how we can make sure that the armed forces is seen as an attractive and viable career. How can we encourage people to still want to sign up and to get involved?
Well, I thought you were going to ask me the question on men wearing makeup that I noticed in the news today, that apparently the army is consulting on men being allowed to wear makeup. The answer is men will be allowed to wear makeup in the army as long as it's camouflage colour, really. That'll be about as far as they're allowed.
Given the amount of time you spent in makeup,
Look, I think on the armed forces, first of all, some things don't change. The sense of adventure, the sense of belonging to something, the sense of contributing to something greater than them, as an individual, I think is really attractive. But we also have to modernize how people work together. In my day when I was serving, very few partners and wives worked. The man, I think when I joined my regiment, there were probably 2 women in the whole regiment, and they both worked in the pay office. Now, if I go to a regiment, whether it's an infantry regiment or an artillery regiment, it doesn't really matter. It's a much more mixed workforce. And people's lifestyles are different as well. So we have to recognize that. And so the modernizing people program that we have in the armed forces, which gives more flexibility about how people live their lives, how they live in accommodation together, how they can, targeting, understanding the different needs where both couples work. I mean, that's a big problem. In the old days, overseas postings, one part of the couple didn't work. So, it was less of a challenge than it is now, where people say, well, I don't want to go to an overseas posting. I currently have a job, and just because my husband's going, why should I? So we've reflected all of that in the new terms and conditions, effectively, of how people are living in their armed forces, giving them that flexibility, because we have to move with the 21st century. I was with the RAF recently, and they've recognised that many people are having more than one career in their life. They're having 1, 2, 3 or 4 careers even. So when people join the armed forces, it doesn't have to be 19 or 18 or 21. It has to be more flexible to allow people who've, let's say, been flying an aeroplane in a civilians. I met someone from a low-cost airline. I won't mention the name of it, Ryanair. But they'd been working. They'd been working with Ryanair, and they'd said, actually, you know, I don't want to do the run to Lanzarote every week. I want to go into a sense of adventure and join the RAF. And I think that's been a really good thing. So that flexibility is matched in the civilian world, and that's exactly what we have to copy. And it's getting results. We're starting to see recruitment pick up. But we've also got to focus on retention. There's no point recruiting more people if people are leaving too early or indeed later on. So we've got to fix some of that as well, and that's what this new money will help us do.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you to the panel as well for their candid responses. And it is my great pleasure now to introduce our third and final speaker, Liz Truss, the Secretary of State for International Trade.
Conference. What an opportunity we have ahead of us. Striking the first trade deals for 45 years, making the case for free enterprise and free trade across the world, promoting the best that our country has to offer. Britain will become the ideas factory of the world, looking outwards, a truly global Britain. Of course, I started auditioning for this role some time ago. In 2014, I made a little speech about cheese exports and pork markets. Because I have always believed there are great opportunities for Britain around the world. Now I'm here at the Department of International Trade, in the driving seat, able to build on the fantastic work of Liam Fox, and of course with my 2 wingmen, Conor Burns and Graham Stewart. Getting Brexit done means that we can fast forward towards the future. It means that we can unleash the potential of every corner of the United Kingdom. Our ports will be reimagined and reinvented. They will transport more goods and services than ever before. And we will bring free ports to high potential towns and cities across the UK. Our free ports will do for trade what financial services did for Canary Wharf. They will mean more opportunities, more freedom, and more enterprise. We'll see ports like Liverpool benefit, but not just them. There will be businesses like Boohoo.com, the fashion retailer here in Manchester, logistics and technology companies providing much better customs services. Because Brexit is a huge opportunity for us to set our own path and make our own decisions, becoming a more creative and more exciting economy. Conference, we have so much to gain from a fast-paced, unpredictable, dynamic world. And not just with our old friends and family like Australia, America, Japan, and New Zealand, but new friends too, the rising nations of South America and Southeast Asia. We've got an opportunity to drive prosperity together. Now, there are some people who fear change. They fear competition. They think the solution is to protect ourselves from the future. I believe that this is the wrong approach. Britain will be on the side of the competitive freedom fighters, not the protectionists. And that is why, in striking new free trade deals, I am prioritizing free market democracies, countries who share our values and can help set global standards. We're not talking here about EU-style regulatory harmonization, a one-size-fits-all approach, but mutual recognition of other countries with high standards. Now, of course, the Labour Party hate the idea of making these closer relationships with our allies. First of all, they don't want a British trade policy at all. They want the EU making our trade decisions without us even being at the table. They want to surrender on trade just like they want to surrender on everything else. But when they had the opportunity, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell refused to vote for EU trade deals with Japan and Canada. So exactly who would they like to trade with? Well, the answer is the only deal that the hard left have ever supported was a deal with Venezuela. Yes, when he was Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone signed a deal with Hugo Chavez, the man who brought down the economy of Venezuela, so powerfully described by Alok. But I think, conference, that Labour have misunderstood the British people. We want to ally with like-minded countries that believe in freedom, not collude with terrorists. We want deals with decent democracies, not dodgy despots. And we don't like being told what to do. We know that, in particular, young people in Britain see the opportunity of a freer, more flexible global Britain. Younger people are more likely to believe in lower taxes than older generations. They're more likely to set up their own businesses than older generations. They've grown up with the easy sharing of information and experiences across the globe. They are global Britons. And what trade deals will do is they'll provide Britain's young people with new opportunities. Young entrepreneurs who set up high-tech startups. We're in the top 3 for billion-dollar companies, billion-dollar tech companies, like Deliveroo and Revolut. London has just overtaken New York in terms of the number of deals in fintech. And in the future, we can rival Silicon Valley. Trade deals could mean that British cheese producers like Wensleydale and Davistow will see their tariffs reduced and eliminated. Currently, they have more than 10% tariffs going into the US markets. Welsh farmers could be selling their lamb into the United States, which they currently can't do at the moment. Our vision for trade deals is all about empowering people to make their own decisions and getting better access to the global market. But it won't just help overseas, it will also help at home, because it will help us become a more competitive and a more confident country, a low-tax, flexible, entrepreneurial leader in the world. With all of our great cities and regions part of this effort, we're going to level up our education, our infrastructure, our technology, and we're going to ensure that everyone in the UK can be part of these fantastic opportunities. I've just flown around the world meeting our key allies. I've spent more time in an aircraft cabin than John Bercow spends looking in the mirror. But ladies and gentlemen, the message wherever I go in the world is always the same. They want Britain's voice at the table of the WTO speaking in favour of free trade. They want to work with our creative, talented people. They want better links with our great industries. They believe in Britain. And conference, isn't it time we believed in Britain too? The fact is, there are too many people in this country who think that our best days are behind us, that somehow that we cannot make it as the 5th largest economy alone in the world. They are wrong, and the British people know they're wrong. They know this is the best country in the world, and they aren't afraid of the new opportunities that Brexit will bring. We can be the biggest economy in Europe. We can be the freest nation on earth. I've just been around the world talking about the opportunities here in Britain. That's my job as Trade Secretary, selling Britain. And believe me, people are buying.
Thank you so much, Liz. I think really we're unfortunately out of time. There's obviously much more we could get into here. It's clear from our conversation that there are some really significant challenges facing the world at the moment, but also a tremendous degree of opportunities for Britain to take a leading role. I think really all that's left is for me to ask you to thank our wonderful Secretaries of State in the usual way. The app was not an easy.
Everyone knows the values that flag represents. It stands for freedom and free speech and habeas corpus and the rule of law, and above all it stands for democracy. Britain is admired and even loved around the world for our inventiveness, for our humour, for our universities, our scientists, our armed forces, our diplomacy.
Thank you, Conference. You know, for me, taking on this job as Foreign Secretary and our mission for a global Britain is the fulfillment of a long-standing dream. 15 years ago, I was a young Foreign Office lawyer. I was posted out to The Hague. And, you know, I used to have diplomats from Asia to South America. They'd come up to me and they'd say, "You guys in the EU spend so much time talking to yourselves. You miss so much of what's going on in the rest of the world." You know, it was true then and it's true today. Brussels isn't the only game in town. Everywhere I go as Foreign Secretary, people are fired up by our vision for a global Britain. When I visited the US, President Trump invited me into the Oval Office to tell me just how much he loves our country and how much he admires our Prime Minister. When I visited Bangkok for the ASEAN meeting of Asia-Pacific nations, they embraced our role in their region because they prize our commitment to the rules-based international system. In Mexico, we talked about climate change. In Canada, we talked about our joint campaign to protect journalists around the world from torture and arbitrary detention. Truth is, we Brits get a very warm welcome almost everywhere in the world. Okay, maybe not in Luxembourg. But you know what? I think the British people have had more than enough of EU leaders disrespecting British Prime Ministers. So we'll strive in good faith for a good deal. But if the EU spurn the opportunity for a win-win deal, we will leave at the end of October. No ifs, no buts. Now, I hope we can stay good European neighbours and friends, but we'll be free to chart our own course as masters of our own destiny at home and abroad, with a much more liberal and energetic approach to free trade, as Liz Truss has just been talking about. But our vision of global Britain also reaches well beyond trade. And when I was posted to The Hague back in 2003, I headed up the Foreign Office's war crimes team. And I can tell you experiences like that stay with you. I visited Sierra Leone and I met the victims of that terrible conflict. And I came across this one boy who told me how a rebel soldier had asked whether he wanted a long or a short sleeve before deciding where to wield his machete on his arm. That was a really heartbreaking story to listen to. But you know what? I'm proud that Britain helped Sierra Leone get back on its feet. I'm proud to have been part of the UK's international effort to bring the perpetrators of those crimes to justice. So as we look to our future, I think our foreign policy should be guided by a clear moral compass. We've got to offer the poorest countries the chance to trade with us, freed from the shackles of hypocritical EU protectionism. We've got to lead when it comes to tackling climate change. That's why we're hosting COP26, which is the global conference on climate change, over in Glasgow next year. And we've got to offer the downtrodden around the world the hope that comes with standing up for the basic freedoms that we cherish here in Manchester this week, in this very conference centre. You know, I think sometimes it feels like a hopeless task. But history remembers the courage of those who stand up to be counted. You know, back in the 1990s, I met a Russian dissident called Natan Sharansky. He'd been locked in a Soviet gulag for 9 years because he was campaigning for the rights of oppressed Jews to leave Russia. Now, I still find it almost impossible to imagine. I mean, just think about it for a moment. 9 years in a Soviet jail. Think about those miserable conditions, being separated from your loved ones. I asked Sharansky what kept his hopes alive during all that long time, locked up alone. And he told me that the political prisoners had a secret way of communicating in the gulag. They tapped on the walls in code to spread the word. So when in 1983 Ronald Reagan stood up and called out the Soviet Union as an evil empire, those prisoners came alive with a hum of jailed dissidents tapping and whispering from cell to cell. And Reagan's courage and moral clarity gave hope to those who feared they'd been forgotten. And Sharansky was the first political prisoner released by Mikhail Gorbachev. Now, I know the world is a very different place today, but we must never forget the lessons of history. And we must keep the flame of freedom alive in the darkest corner of the bleakest jails. For those struggling for the basic liberties we take for granted, the rights you jealously guard here this week to debate, to have your say, to hold your politicians to account. So we won't look the other way when the people of Hong Kong are beaten on commuter trains for exercising their right to peaceful protest. We won't stand idly by whilst journalists are jailed or tortured or beaten up for criticising the despotic regime of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. And conference, we will never rest until all those bearing UK nationality detained on a cruel whim in Iran are free to rejoin their loved ones at home. No, that's not our way. We'll relish, not shrink, from our duty to take a leading role in bringing the perpetrators of the worst injustices to account. Whether it's ensuring the release of the 2 Reuters journalists jailed in Myanmar just for reporting on the plight of the Rohingya refugees, or bringing war criminals to justice from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And when we leave the EU, we're going to be able to do even more. So, conference, I can tell you today that when we leave the EU, we're going to bring into force a UK Magnitsky law to put visa bans and asset freezes on those individuals deemed responsible for serious human rights abuses like torture. Because the British people don't want those with blood on their hands doing their Christmas shopping down in Knightsbridge. They don't want their dirty money laundered through British banks. And because our vision of a truly global Britain means being a force for good in the world, a good global citizen. And you know, conference, when I think about some of the challenges we face in the world and how hard some of those people have it abroad, and I think of the fate of those living under oppression, it reminds me just how lucky we are, just how much we prize our hard-earned prosperity and our hard-won freedoms here in this country. And we must never take those for granted. And that's what's at stake if Labour takes office under Jeremy Corbyn. The Labour Party, once a mainstream party, now hails the failed socialist experiment in Venezuela, where the population starves and dissidents are shot in the street. A party that chooses to believe the Kremlin over its own intelligence agencies when Putin's assassins poison people on the streets of Salisbury. And a party led by a man in Jeremy Corbyn who attends a memorial at the graves of terrorists responsible for butchering Israeli Olympic athletes out of anti-Semitic hate. I say this, and I say it to all of you, you know I'm a passionate Brexiteer. There are some things even bigger than Brexit. And keeping that lot out of Downing Street is one of them. So, to any of our colleagues or former colleagues who may just be tempted to put Jeremy Corbyn and that momentum mob into number 10 as part of some kind of temporary anti-Brexit coalition, I just say this: history would never forgive you. And as for the Liberal Democrats, they want to scrap the result of the 2016 vote. You can't call yourself a Democrat, put it in the name of your party, and then try to cancel a referendum. No one ever accused the Lib Dems of consistency. But when it comes to offences under the Trade Description Act, they are guilty as charged. This Prime Minister's got a better way to take us forward. Let's get Brexit done. Let's move on. Let's unite behind that one nation vision for our country, and let's bring the Conservative family back together. You know, we in the Conservatives, we keep our promises. So we're going to make a success of Brexit. We're going to free our country to reach its full potential. And with this Prime Minister's leadership, with his energy, we're going to seize the historic opportunity for Britain to reach out to the world on our own terms, with global horizons, limitless ambition, and a strong moral compass. My friends, it's time to put the past behind us. It's time to let go of the wrangling and the doubts. It's time for us to be the country we want to be. Great Britain, ambitious, confident, and free. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your panel chair, Dia Chakravarti.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this session and a good afternoon to you all. This session, as you know, is getting Brexit done and about what the government is doing to get Brexit done, delivering Brexit. On the panel, we have three of the most senior members of the government who are intimately involved in designing and implementing the government's Brexit strategy. So if anybody can tell us what the government is doing to deliver Brexit, it will be them. So it's a great opportunity to have them here. I didn't hear that, but hold on to that. Perhaps we'll come back to you later after we've listened to these guys. You know them all, so I'm not going to waste any time introducing them to you. We're just going to go straight to the speeches. The way it's going to work is we're going to have the first speaker, which is going to be Michael. Then we're going to have some questions, which I have on this iPad. Hopefully you've all been sending your questions in. Then we're going to move on to Jacob. We're going to have some more questions, and then on to Steve ultimately. So, without further ado, please may I ask the Right Honourable Michael Gove to present, well, to address us.
Thank you very much, dear. These are testing times for our party and for our country. A paralysed parliament, a polarised politics, and urgent reforms that this country needs put on pause. And all because the referendum vote has not been honoured and Brexit has not been delivered. $17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union in June 2016, more than have ever voted for any party or any policy in our country's history. But 3 years on, that democratic verdict has not been honoured. We cannot allow this division and delay to continue. We must get Brexit done. And the only party leader determined to secure a good deal for Britain and to get Brexit done is our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Now, I've known Boris for more than 30 years, and while we haven't always agreed on everything, let me tell you this. Boris is brave, he is determined, he loves this country, and he delivers. And that's because Boris is an optimist. He believes in the power of the British people to change the world for the better. And that optimism has allowed him to overcome big challenges before. Throughout his career of public service, people have told him, it just can't be done. You can't possibly beat Ken Livingstone in London to become the mayor. You can't possibly get re-elected in a Labour city with a Conservative government in Westminster. You can't possibly get new bikes on our roads, new buses on our streets, keep fares down, keep the economy growing, cut crime, get investment for new schools, and deliver the world's best ever Olympics, and lift thousands out of poverty. But again and again, Boris has delivered. As he did when we led the Vote Leave campaign. People said we'd never win. The odds were against us. The establishment was against us. Even Nigel Farage was against us. But Vote Leave won. Because our message then, like our Prime Minister today, was optimistic, forward-looking, and freedom-loving. And that's why I trust Boris to do what we've waited too long to do. Get a great deal, get Brexit done, and allow us to get on with what really matters. Investing in our precious NHS, supporting teachers in our great state schools, and backing our brave police in the fight against crime. These are the people's priorities. They are our priorities. And that is why now we are the real People's Party. And of course, while we're optimistic about our future, we're also realistic about some of the challenges immediately ahead. In getting Brexit done, we will have to show resolution. We have to negotiate hard to get the right Brexit deal. And if we don't get a deal by October the 31st, then we will have to leave without a deal. We simply cannot allow this process to drag on indefinitely. Now, I don't deny that leaving without a deal will, initially, mean that there are some challenges. The EU plans to impose new tariffs, new checks on trade, and it isn't showing the same generosity to UK nationals as we're showing to EU nationals. But we will stay open for trade, open for business, and determined to respect the rights of all EU citizens in this country. And we've taken huge steps to get ready. We're investing in new customs procedures to smooth trade, we're supporting business to adapt to new rules, and we're standing up for our citizens abroad. The level of our preparations has accelerated massively since Boris became Prime Minister. Now, of course, we can't anticipate every risk, we can't guarantee against some turbulence, and that's why I would much prefer us to secure a deal with the EU before October the 31st. After all, it's in their interests as well as ours. But if we can't, then leave we must. Because while the difficulties caused by leaving without a deal will pass, the damage to our democracy in not getting Brexit done would endure and resound for much longer. Our democracy is precious, and it depends on people trusting us as politicians when we say that we will put our trust in them. On the eve of the referendum result in 2016, it was the late Paddy Ashdown who actually got to the heart of it. He said, "I will forgive no one who does not accept the sovereign voice of the British people once it has spoken. When democracy speaks, we obey." When democracy speaks, we, the politicians, obey. That's the position of a true liberal and a true Democrat. But it is not the position of the party that today calls itself the Liberal Democrats. They refuse to accept the sovereign voice of the British people. They have worked constantly to delay, dilute, and deny Brexit. And now they want to cancel Brexit altogether. Telling the public that they won't be listened to until they agree with Guy Verhofstadt isn't liberal or democratic. It's patronising, condescending, we know best, get back in line and know your place arrogance of the kind that makes Marie Antoinette seem like a model of grounded humility. Voting Liberal Democrat doesn't get Brexit done, but it does risk something else. Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn. Voting for any party other than the Conservatives risks letting Labour into power and Corbyn into Downing Street. And Labour in government wouldn't get Brexit done. They want to prolong our membership of the EU, negotiate for many months more with Brussels, then agree a deal, but only on the EU's terms, and then hold another referendum in which they would be prepared to say that we should stay in the EU forever. When we should be getting on with improving education, strengthening the NHS and fighting crime and creating jobs, Labour would be getting on with what it does best, showing weakness abroad, sowing division at home, and tearing itself and the country apart. You simply need to look at Jeremy Corbyn's record. How can we let a man who supported Sinn Féin IRA be in charge of our nation's security? How can we let a man who thinks that we shouldn't have immigration controls be in charge of our borders? How can we let a man who thinks we should punish companies for being successful be in charge of our economy? And how on earth can we let a man who's indulged, accommodated, and excused the most terrible anti-Semitism be in charge of our democracy? Soft on terrorism, supine on security, bankrupt economically, and a danger to minorities, Jeremy Corbyn is totally unfit to be Prime Minister of our country. Yes, these are testing times. But when our party and our country have been tested in the past, we have met and mastered the challenges of our times. Conservatives rose to the challenge of the Industrial Revolution with the courage to cut tariffs and with the compassion to pass laws to protect factory workers. Conservatives responded to the turbulence of the 1930s with investment in health and housing for the poorest and the resolution to rearm in the face of dictatorships. Conservatives also reversed the decline of our nation in the 1980s by spreading wealth, extending home ownership, increasing educational opportunity, and facing down Marxism at home and abroad. And of course, after the great crash of 2008, it was Conservative leadership that repaired our economy, reformed our schools, helped millions into work, put rehabilitation at the heart of justice, fought climate change, enhanced our environment, and held the light of liberty aloft while freedom came under attack across the globe. Now we have the chance, this generation of Conservatives, to embrace a new decade of renewal, to make our country the best in the world for education and science, the best in the world when it comes to using technology to banish hunger, fight climate change, and end poverty, the most civilized, tolerant, and welcoming home to people of all backgrounds, the most creative, imaginative, and entrepreneurial place on earth, a nation renewed and a mission to lead the world. That is our challenge and our calling. Let us be worthy of it, together.
Thank you very much, Michael. Moving on to a couple of questions now. The first question, with the most number of upticks, if you like, is will we deliver Brexit by the 31st of October? But I have a feeling if I put that to the three of you, you're all going to give a monosyllabic answer. So let's try and move on from that one. The next one is, how will we stop the hopeless government of national disunity, as people seem to call it, from taking over number 10? To all three of you. Do you want to start,
Sure.
Steve?
Well, you don't unite the country by denying democracy and ignoring the biggest vote in our history. It is not unity to have a government formed by just one side of the argument. And the biggest issue in terms of the rise of populism is parties that don't respect democratic decisions. So that is why we will be out on the 31st of October, because we are a party that will always trust the people and deliver on their vote.
Well, the problem with the initials Government of National Unity is it makes a GNU. And some of you will remember Flanders and Swan, the nicest work of nature in the zoo. And it seems to me that is an appropriate place for a GNU, not 10 Downing Street. And it is, of course, as Steve was intimating, actually, not unity at all. It's a Ramona coup, isn't it? It's to try and frustrate and stop what 17.4 million people voted for. And the comeuppance they will get, if they defy the electorate, will come in the ballot box when we come to a general election. So fear nothing that they try to do, fear nothing of their schemes and their stratagems, because ultimately we will have a general election. And parties that deny democracy get into great trouble when people have the chance to vote. And I would have thought the Liberal Democrats, after their experience of coalition, would be wary of going into coalition with Jeremy Corbyn. The last 2 times they tried it, they got wiped out in ensuing general elections. How sad that would be.
I'm in favour of a government of national unity. Do you know how we get it? We have a general election. We put to the people the essential question, who should govern our country? I'm confident what the response will be. Boris Johnson re-elected, a Conservative majority, our country unified, Brexit done, and are concentrating on what we need to do as a government, which is making sure that this country can be the best in the world.
The next most popular question is, what progress is being made in the Brexit talks? And if I may please add a sort of supplementary onto that. Given that the Prime Minister has said today that it will not, when we see a deal, it's not going to be a return to Mrs. May's deal, How confident are you that it's actually going to be a substantially different deal? Perhaps we should start with Michael.
Well, Steve is in the lead in these negotiations, and Steve and Boris and Dominic Raab have secured big changes in what the EU have said that they would be prepared to do. Before Boris became Prime Minister, before Steve started these negotiations intensively in the last couple of months, the EU said the withdrawal agreement was sacrosanct, it couldn't be changed. Now they're saying it can be changed. And they also said that the backstop was inviolable. That was the only way to make sure that we had an answer for the challenges on the island of Ireland. But now they're saying, actually, the backstop can be replaced. They're not emotionally attached to it. So those are significant gains, and they're down to the fact that Boris has given us clear leadership on this issue, and that Steve, Dominic, and their respective teams have been engaging with EU leaders to make them appreciate how important it is to get a deal that will pass the House of Commons.
Jacob?
I'm going to defer to Michael and Steve because it's their area of expertise. I have the comparatively easy task, along with the Chief Whip, of trying to get what they agree through the House of Commons.
And there's a question, there's a question with your name written on. You just wait, Jacob. But Steve, yes, it is, of course, your department.
Well, what links those two answers is the deal has to be one that will pass Parliament, and we know that Parliament has rejected the backstop, and that is why the backstop has to go. Because it is at odds with our tradition as a Conservative and Unionist party. It is at odds with the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which is built on the consent of both communities. And because it would involve laws applying in Northern Ireland over which people will not have a say. And now, when I travel across European capitals, the very clear message that comes from those capitals is they want a deal. Both sides recognise a deal is the best outcome. But we've been very clear, and the Prime Minister has been very clear throughout the summer, well, come what may, we are leaving, because that is what democracy in this country requires.
Thank you. I think with that we can move on to our second speaker. And please, Jacob, the Right Honourable Jacob Rees-Mogg MP, the Leader of the House of Commons.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. There seems to be some enthusiasm in this hall for getting Brexit done. And I didn't realise there were so many members of the North East Somerset Conservative Association here, with whom I always had a little deal at fringe events, which was that if I needed a little bit of extra applause, I'll tug on my earlobe. So you're now let into the secret. But it's an extraordinary honour for me to be here speaking at this conference. Because like so many of you, I belonged to this party since I was a mere youth. And I'm sorry to confess I was once a mere youth. I've sat like you in the seats in the days when conferences were held at the seaside. And I cannot tell you how pleased I am that you, the members, are once again the focus of these sessions. It was here, thank you, somebody agrees with me. Thank you. It was here in Manchester that Disraeli captured the essence of Conservative principles in his 1872 speech at the Free Trade Hall, which lasted, out of interest, for over 4 hours. Don't worry. When he set out our priorities for the Constitution and for the condition of the people, especially their health. He also noted that the audience he was addressing was of the highest intelligence, but not one that could compete with the brilliance, the luminosity of the audience in front of me today. We are better than Disraeli's audience. And he knew that the Conservative Party is a grassroots party. You, ladies and gentlemen, are the source of all our energy and intellectual nutrition. And it is right that you, the members, are back at the heart of our conference. And we owe you a debt of gratitude, an enormous debt, for your robustness and resolve now that the constitutional storm clouds muster over this nation. We feel a bit like Gulliver, tied down at Lilliput, tied down by a ragtag, motley collection of feeble, footling, feckless politicians, all in desperate pursuit of a single unworthy aim, to renege on the solemn promise they made to the British people and to try to cancel the largest single democratic mandate in our history. On the left, not you, ladies and gentlemen, on the left, we have Jeremy Corbyn, self-avowed Marxist, arguably the most left-wing leader the Labour Party has ever had, who has achieved the most remarkable feat of being even more unpopular on his side than on ours. Now, I never thought I'd get such applause for Jeremy Corbyn at a Tory party conference. Mr. Corbyn would have the public believe that he is a man of principle. Jeremy Corbyn, a man who spent his career in the division lobbies as a Eurosceptic, with our great heroes Ian Duncan Smith, Bill Cash and John Redwood, voting against the European Union in his campaign for Remain. And now Corbyn's Surrender Act simply offers more confusion and delay at a cost of £250 million every week. This from the gentleman who has spent the last 2 years demanding an immediate general election, only now to run away from an election once it was offered to him as a model of Georgie Porgy, who you will remember, Georgie Porgy, Pudding and Pie, kissed the girls and made them cry. When the boys came out to play, Jeremy Corbyn ran away. He is a man who claims to have spent his entire career fighting racism, only to allow such virulent anti-Jewish racism to proliferate in the Labour Party that under his leadership, it has become the second party in this nation's history after the BNP to be formally investigated for racism. I do not believe that Jeremy Corbyn is a bad man, but he is a weak man, too weak to lead his party, certainly too weak to lead his country. And behind him there may be stronger men, like Sir Keir Starmer, poised as if Brutus, stiletto in hand, awaiting the moment to strike, striking, of course, being something the left are quite fond of. The supposed mastermind of Labour's Brexit policy, whose much vaunted helmsmanship has steered the Labour Party into the implausible straits of claiming they want to negotiate a new deal with Brussels, then to campaign against it in a referendum to remain in the European Union. That is Labour logic for you. In friendship false, implacable in hate, resolved to ruin or to rule the state. Those words were from the time of Charles II, and I think they apply to the Labour Party now. But let us not forget the middle muddle, where we have Jo Swinson, Liberal Democrat by name, but not by nature. Liberal in accepting the yoke of Brussels, democratic perhaps only in her own mind as a figment of the imagination, because it is they who take the extreme position. They want to cancel Brexit entirely without giving the people a say. And then on the right, we have the in many ways admirable Nigel Farage, who sent to Brussels, I think, the finest politician we have ever sent to the European Parliament, in the form of my sister. And I shall report back to Annunziata that she got an even better chair than Jeremy Corbyn at the Tory party conference. However, we must not delude ourselves into thinking that a vote for the Brexit party does anything other than increase the risk of Brexit being cancelled altogether. And then we have the Speaker. As a parliamentarian, no, listen, because I'm actually going to be nice about him. But wait. As a parliamentarian, I have been, and in many ways remain, a great admirer of the Speaker. He has helped MPs hold the government to account and to seek redress of grievance. But in my view, he has now flown too close to the sun. And I hope that as he comes to his retirement, he will not allow the good he has done in his earlier years to be forgotten. But his recent mistakes have, to my deepest regret as leader of the House of Commons, damaged the standing of the House in the eyes of the British public to its lowest point in modern history. So how can this impasse, created by Mr. Corbyn and friends who wish to cancel the referendum, be resolved? Well, it's simple. And this is a Tory party slogan that goes back to Lord Randolph Churchill. We must trust the people. The people have spoken. Ladies and gentlemen, you have spoken. We are not your leaders from on high, we are your servants. And it is our responsibility to do what you have willed. Parliament has promised to do it. Over 80% of members of Parliament were elected on a promise to respect the result. And the sovereignty of Parliament does not come out of a void, it comes to Parliament from the people. Yet this Parliament is now holding the people in contempt. Ladies and gentlemen, they are holding you in contempt. So we must have a general election. It is time for a new Parliament. A new egg must be laid that is not addled as this one is. We must trust the people as our opponents do not. And it is only a Conservative government led by our fantastic Prime Minister that can get Brexit done and deliver on the people's genuine priorities, because Brexit is a means to an end, not an end in itself. So boosting the NHS, providing more police on the streets, creating more good school places, and cutting the cost of living. So let me conclude as I started with Disraeli. Disraeli set out the glorious balance of our Constitution. That balance has been disturbed, distorted, and displaced. And it is our responsibility to restore that balance once more. And that will be done through a general election, through the good sense of our masters, the British people.
Thank you very much, Jacob. The next most popular question actually really does have your name written on it. I think you would be in the best position to answer this. This question is, I believe Boris and team will get a good deal from the EU, but how will we get a majority in Parliament to vote for it?
It is a very important question, but I think the mood has changed in the country at large, that everybody now wants to leave and start talking about other things. And I think that's true in the House of Commons as well. And I think if the DUP are happy with the deal, there'll be very few Conservatives, including those who are without the whip, who are then against a deal. And at that point, there are a number of people in other parties who think that, yes, we must now just finish this. You're all great Brexiteers. You've got the fantastic posters to hold up. Thank you very much. Who here wants to stop talking about Brexit and talk about other things after 31st of October? Hands up. Well, even if I were chairman of the Labour Party conference, that motion was carried.
I'm a little bit, sorry, but I'm a little bit conscious of the time we have left. So if Michael or Steve have nothing burning to add to that in response to that question, please may I now ask the Right Honourable Steve Barclay to address the audience.
Delaying Brexit has come at a cost. It has cost us trust in our democracy. For those who, in good faith, at the last general election, believed the promises of members of Parliament who said they would honour our vote to leave the EU. And it has a massive financial cost. In extra payments to the EU, it costs an extra £1 billion a month for every month that we delay. And how much has the delay cost in lost opportunities? The very opportunities which we voted for to lower living costs by forging new trade deals around the world. With so much delay, is it any wonder my good friend Jacob has taken to lying down on the government front bench? But there has been one immediate cost from delaying Brexit. The prolonged uncertainty has caused worry and concern to over 3 million EU citizens living in our country. For those EU citizens living here, I have a direct message today. You are not part of the negotiation. Your life and livelihood in the UK is not in doubt. Now, the Prime Minister set this out in the first hour in office on the steps of Downing Street. He made it clear that we want those citizens to stay. We're proud that they have chosen to bring up their families in our communities, to work in our public services and in our businesses, in our NHS, where there are over 700 more EU doctors today than at the time of the referendum. We value the contribution you make to our country and are pleased that you have chosen to make your home here. We have guaranteed your rights to live, work and stay in the UK with full citizens' rights for as long as you choose. Now it is time for the EU to match that guarantee. Now, I'm sure, Conference, I'm not alone in being familiar with the refrain, despite Brexit. Yet despite Brexit, we have record low unemployment and the highest inward investment of any country in Europe, despite Brexit. Just last week, London overtook New York to become the #1 city for investment in fintech. And despite Brexit, Jaguar Land Rover has just opened a state-of-the-art car design centre, delivering a £500 million vote of confidence in Britain. It's time to stop apologising for Brexit and unleash the opportunities it offers. We can source products that we do not produce at a better price. Too often, the EU restricts access to markets that we want to trade with, like the foods we do not grow in the UK, or the products we do not specialise in producing. With new trade deals with other countries, we can help the developing world through trade, rather than handing out aid. To empower countries through free trade is the essence of being conservative, and an important part of why I am a Brexiteer. To use Brexit as a catalyst for change across all parts of the United Kingdom, including areas like my own in the Fens, who see Brexit as an opportunity, not a problem to be solved. Now, Jeremy Corbyn parades his credentials as an animal rights campaigner, but his delay prevents our sovereign choice on the continued live animal exports. He claims to care about the planet, yet his delay to Brexit means we can't choose to remove VAT on environmental products like solar panels. His delay prevents us from implementing a new agriculture bill designed for our British farmers, not those of the French. And delay also means less time to focus on our priorities. It's the Conservatives who want to get Brexit done so that we can focus on what people really want to see. The biggest increase in spending on the NHS, tackling crime through the extra 20,000 police officers, and levelling up opportunity, including on school funding. And delay puts our United Kingdom at risk, encouraging the Scottish nationalists that if one referendum can be ignored, then so too can the 2014 referendum on the integrity of the UK itself. We will defend the Union because we are the Conservative and Unionist Party. And what do Labour want to have more delay on Brexit for? They cannot even count the vote at their conference on what they want to do. And Diane Abbott wasn't even doing the counting. Remain, sit on the fence, keep it a secret until after the election. Labour don't trust the people, and that is why the people cannot trust them. Labour ignore the votes of the many, because they prefer to listen to the opinions of the North London few. Now, their position is to negotiate Brexit and then to scrap it. Now, that would demolish the UK's negotiating position. And what would they do once they had negotiated this fantasy Brexit deal? Well, the Shadow Foreign Secretary told us. She made it clear. They would bring it back and have an unwanted, divisive second referendum where they would vote and campaign to remain against their own deal. Labour's Brexit policy can be summed up in 3 words: dither and delay. And look at the so-called Liberal Democrats. They want to revoke Article 50 without even letting you have a say. Now, the Liberal Democrat position is now so extreme, it's even been rejected by the Green Party. The Irish Deputy Prime Minister said on Wednesday that there are solutions to this, but it is a matter of political will. Well, I agree. The Commission has said that it's open to creative and flexible solutions on the border in Northern Ireland. I am too. President Juncker has said he's not wedded to the backstop, nor are we, so let's abolish it. The Prime Minister and I are focused on negotiating a deal, but if we can't get a deal, we'll leave on the 31st of October anyway. Michel Barnier once said, the clock is ticking. For Jeremy Corbyn, the election clock is now ticking very loudly. Our communities should not have to pay millions for each further hour of his delay. We as Conservatives know that it's your money that he would waste. We need to get Brexit done, and with this Prime Minister, we will.
Thank you so much, Steve. We are dangerously running out of time, so I don't think we will have very much time for too many other questions. But I just thought I will leave with something that sounds a little bit like a mischievous question. And do please keep your answers short. And the question is, do you think other countries will leave the EU after Britain does? Michael, you haven't been saying anything for a long time.
I don't think so. The American baseball coach, Yogi Berra, said never make predictions, especially about the future. I think that there are particular reasons why Britain was right to leave the European Union at this time, and I respect the right of other nations to forge their own future. So my own hunch is that Britain will leave, other countries will stay, but 10, 15, 20 years on, I think we may see a very different European Union from the one we have now.
Jacob?
Well, they would if they got any sense, wouldn't they? I mean, but that's not a forecast. I mean, I think the problems with the euro are so deep-seated that the current euro project, European Union project, can't last long into the future, but things often last longer than one anticipates.
Steve?
I think it goes back to, if you look at things like a speech by de Gaulle in '67, how the UK went in. I think it's always been the case that our relationship has been different. I think that is what's reflected there. And I think the euro will require Europe to integrate more rather than less. And I think that's the direction of travel that many of us as supporters of Leave saw. And that was a big part in why we wanted to assert our democracy, because we recognise that Europe may well need to integrate further. We respect their wish to do so. We just don't want to be part of that.
Michael, Jacob and Steve, Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And thank you so much for being here today, ladies and gentlemen. Please give a round of applause to our wonderful panel.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Meet the Chairman session will start in here at 4:30.